you're gonna get free this time. Falling into a blue sky mind. Came to me in that song,
Welcome
my
back
friend.
to You, Me, and the
I
Elephants
just
with
wanna go
Crystal Clear and
Deborah Air.
and the crowd goes wild.
That is definitely your signature. Today, we are talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart. The question is, how do you nurture your creativity? How do you nurture your creativity?
I don't know why my mind wants to go, do you mean like crafts?
I think there's something to that. I was thinking about how many times I have heard people say, and I don't know if I've said this, maybe, or if I haven't said it, I've probably lived it in some way, that we do have certain ways in which I think as a culture, we talk about creativity, like whether you're a creative or not. It's like, well, I'm not very creative. My point is I've heard a
Yes.
lot of people say over my lifetime, well, I'm not very creative, whether it's decorating their home or how they dress or whatever it might be, or, oh, I'm not creative, I can't sing, that there is certainly a imprint of how we understand creativity in our culture, and that in general it is set into the category of being an artist of some kind.
Or
And
producing something, like even me thinking crafts, it's kind of like this way of going, well, what do you
exactly,
show for this
I'm
creativity thing that you're doing?
like, I'm not very crafty.
So
As per usual, I feel like there's a lot more room for us to explore. So if you are one of those people that go, oh, I'm not so crafty, or I'm not very creative, and maybe has some pocket of shame or guilt, or maybe you don't even think about it, you just don't even go there, I think this will be a great conversation, because we're literally just shooting from the creative hip right here and having a conversation that seems very worthwhile. I had a conversation with my friend this morning, and she saw the guitar in my corner and she's like, how often do you play? So there was a part of me that's like, oh, ha ha ha. Do I tell her the complete truth, which would be none? Or do I just tell her the story that I'm working my way towards playing it? And then I talked about, which most of you that follow this podcast know, that I'm on this journey of learning Spanish. And I was explaining to her, I said, a lot of my life has been very focused. And as much as my focus is the universe, which is expansive, I have done it in the three-dimensional way very specifically. I've lived in the same place for a long time. I have had the same business. I've done certainly not the same thing that has evolved. However, it's been very focused. And from a very young age, I remember, not that my parents weren't supportive of creativity in the way that I think we just defined it by the culture, but most certainly what got rewarded more is perseverance, doing well at sports, doing well in school, and somehow persevering out in the world. And I still have that to this day, but I do feel humbly so that it's evolved. But my whole point, and back to the conversation with my friend, is she said, basically, like, you're getting into your creative nature because I'm looking into these things that I never did. My deeper thought was that I have lived a life that's been very focused in a way that the world can appreciate me. Not that, even though I do it differently and I'm in some ways on the outskirts, I've been probably called a witch way too many times than I can imagine. And yet I also have this way in which I have a professional business. I have ways that fit into the culture that aren't necessarily thought of as creative. Healthcare professional isn't necessarily thought of as a creative. And so when she said that, I had to laugh, because I didn't even tell her that this is what we were going to talk about today, because it's just happened today, which goes back to the first thought, which is like, what do you think as what creative means, and how do you associate with being creative? Because I think this can go a lot of different places. I've seen creatives, I'm using quotations, creative people also struggle in the world. And when I say creative people, it could be like, I want to be a rock star. I want to be an actor. I want to be a famous artist. And those kinds of ways of using your gifts in the world can sometimes be harder because the culture hasn't valued those things as purposeful as, let's say, a healthcare professional office, right? So
Mhm.
there's a mismatch on how much energy goes into being able to leverage yourself in the world that way. So I think creatives that are identifying as creatives may have a hard time with that. And then I think that those of us that maybe don't think we are creative and we have invested a lot of our life into the things that seem like they matter to the culture, then we may have a way in which we are supported by the culture, but we also maybe have gone away from like these sparks of creation, which we're going to talk about,
Mhm.
these
Yeah,
ways of
true, our
feeling
true
creative
creative.
or
Yeah.
even feeling like we're not creative.
Mhm.
I just had a conversation with someone the other day, and he was talking about, he's a carpenter, and he was talking also about kind of what I'm saying is that he's like, you could sell insurance and there's no creativity in it at all, but you can do well in the world. And a carpenter, it's getting less and less that someone wants a carpenter. And I really heard that, the pain that's in there. And this conversation that I want to bring forward today is that how can we find the creative nature in ourselves, regardless if we sell insurance or regardless if we're a carpenter?
Hmm. I like that. And it helps to, when this question first came up, how do you nurture your creativity? There was moments that allowed me to remember those really like mundane moments, those really simple moments of having a creative response in an ordinary, what felt to be like an ordinary moment. And
Mm.
so I really like that piece too of I appreciate the bigger picture that we're painting. And then I felt those subtleties that came underneath that of like, and it makes me think of my grandmother for one, because she used to always be the one that, I don't know, she just like would just compliment, just bless her heart, just like compliment someone over the simple little things. But there was this moment, and I can't get it out of my head, that Dylan, as a baby, he shoved a sticker up his nose so far that we could not get this sticker out. And she's a nurse, and I'm a new mom, and
I
and
didn't
we're
know
sitting
that.
here at the kitchen table. She's sitting here going like, "Oh, we're about to have a situation here," and Dylan's freaking out. And he's got this giant metal looking, the shiny one, whatever sticker up his nose.
Oh, yeah.
We're not talking no little smiley face or star from the
Right.
teacher. This was like
It's like a
a
deluxe
real
sticker.
bumper sticker quality
Oh my
sticker
God.
shoved up his nose as a
Right.
baby. But I remember the first thing that came to my mind was we can't get it out. I need him to sneeze. I was like, how do I get him
Oh,
to sneeze? I opened the packet of pepper. And I was like waving it in front of his nose, and sure enough, he sneezed, and he sneezed that sticker down enough to get it. But what is so funny is that I'll never forget my grandmother looking at me going, "You are so creative." And I was like, "What?"
I love that
Yeah.
story. I
So that's what I
absolutely,
mean by like there's these beautiful subtleties that come into
mm,
our nature. And that's what I think we're speaking to is like being in the nature
yeah,
of being creative. It took like this ordinary moment and you brought in that creativity that you
right.
of thinking outside of the box.
I
I
love
was
that story because in that moment, your organic nature and your motherness allowed the spectrum to open, and like you allowed that in to versus like you could have just panicked and been like, "Oh my God, we have to go to the professionals," right? And sometimes we do. That's not to say that, but you were able to get creative, and I think that that is a perfect example, a small but perfect example of a moment where, wow, like you MacGyvered that shit. You know what I mean? For those of you that remember the show MacGyver, even going back to the conversation with my friend, I remember, and it's probably at least a decade or so ago, where I felt sadness around how much I had sort of tunneled visioned the things that I did. And certainly I was a single mom, a full-time business that, it takes time, it takes your energy. But that parlayed with the culture also not necessarily saying, hey, this is a value, bringing in those sparks of creation that are you, or bringing even the spark of creation in what you're doing, which I do think that I have done. But the sadness, to go back to the 10 years ago, is that I felt like there were so many parts of myself I didn't let in because I was busy doing the things that were more acceptable. I never really picked up a guitar. When I was young, I used to sing all the time, and I used to do the little, I had one of those cassette recorders things you record, and I would record singing. And of course, my parents were so lovely. They were like, it's so good. I used to sing, I don't know, Captain and Tennille, Muskrat, Muskrat, Candlelight. Do you know that song?
I
Yeah,
do.
probably. Do
Look
you? Oh my
at you.
goodness.
You're happening, young
Doing
lady,
the
remaking your
tiny,
karaoke debut.
doing it right in the evening. I don't remember but point is that never really got nurtured. And because I started to go into the pool of the world, and there's many different reasons why. It could be that I was the youngest. It could be that it was just, I can be known better by the world, even though it's not conscious, right? By doing these things that seem more applicable to support from what culture values most. I think that goes into the noise of the world. At this stage of my life, it feels so different in the way that, my gosh, even with the podcast, we've talked about this, or different workshops that I'm creating and putting together for people, that there is this allowing for that shutter to open of the universe that connects us to more of an eternal existence, as something different, more broader, invisible wisdom that we need to be willing to receive. We need to be able to get out of our normal mental construct that says, this is how it is, this is what we're doing. And it can be scary to loosen the grip a little bit and go, well, what if I didn't have both hands on the wheel right now? Like everyone knows as a kid, if you're riding your bike, like no hands, there's something so exhilarating. And I feel like that exhilaration is the bigger truth that is trying to be birthed. I had this vision this morning, knowing that we were going to be talking about this, that just came in. And I thought, regardless of what you label it, I was imagining like the weaver, the universe, the source, the God, whatever you relate to, is like a big beehive. It's this big ass beehive. And sometimes as souls, we're like, okay, we all have this very important role of creating, like without everybody's role, right, in that beehive, each bee has a very particular purpose. And without that, things will collapse. And I feel the same with us. Like we're all these star beings that say, okay, we're in the hive and things are weaving. We're like, oh, I want to go create that because that's what I'm here for. Like I'm here to be part of the hive, and I'm here to create, where I believe we're all creatrixes. We are here to continue to let the universe embody itself through Mother Earth, through our bodies, through our humanity. And I think it's very easy to forget that. Do we just stop? Do we lose our zest to really know that that creative fervor, that creatrix, like you are the only you? And we need you in the hive. And the best way that we can light up the world is by remembering that the doorway of creativity is where we find and remember ourselves, and that special sauce that we only have to
I
give.
immediately think to wanting to shut down electronics in my house.
Yes.
All my solutions, mind you, just a disclaimer, goes to how can I cut the power to the Wi-Fi in the house, because I have teenagers. So there's 4 of us in the household and we can all plug in very easily. But the point of it is, as we're speaking to this, it's making me think of my daughter she definitely gravitates toward a special artistic ability. And I'm finding at her age and stage that she's observing how there almost needs to be a product produced if that's the shirt that you wear. Like my son, he wears the baseball shirt. So naturally he needs to go and produce. I put the effort in for practicing. I'm the pitcher. I do this, I do that. I have this product that comes from my creativity. But what I find is that when that is forced, and not in the flow of having fun or maybe nurturing the thing that feels good, it becomes something that loses that spark for them.
Mhm.
And then it becomes this thing of, oh, did I truly lose the passion for this because it became forced? Or
Mhm.
and I could probably go down a rabbit hole with this because I can hear other sides go, well, if you don't practice, you don't get better at your, like, at a
Absolutely.
basic level without it going there first. At that very basic level, the sparkle in your eye is doing it for the pure joy sake of, like, it feels good. You don't have to be the sports player, the talented sports player that only receives joy from sports. You can finger paint too. And then for my daughter, you can do all this drawing and go play kickball in the front yard of the neighborhood. So there's this way of tapping into, how do you watch that within? How do you track that from
Mhm.
within? So you're not
Mhm.
just doing it for the production of doing it.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big one. I've shared this with you a lot this last year of having these creative flows come in and what I call downloads from the universe, and seeing images and seeing organizational charts and going, oh my God, and being massively reverent for it and
Mhm.
grateful. But that part that comes in so quickly is like, oh, how do I launch this into the world? How do I
Mm.
make this happen? And I have to check myself and be like, can I just be in the receivership and in the awe of what I am being privileged to remember right now?
Mm.
Because to go back to the unique thread, I think the creative flow brings us into remembering, as if we come flying down and we're like, okay, I'm part of the hive and this is my job. And then we fly by the tree of forgetfulness, right? And then we land here and
Mhm.
we're like, hmm, I don't remember. Who am I again? And then we look outside of ourselves and the world goes, oh, let me tell you who you are.
Yes,
Let
yes,
me tell you who you are and all this stuff that you have to do to prove who you are.
right.
And that is something that we all live with. I don't care, even if we're off the radar, we think we live differently. That is so imprinted. We have all flown through that tree of forgetfulness, and we are always looking outside of ourselves. So that feeling that I had, and I can feel it in my neurology when it wants to flip into something. And you've seen me in tears, being like, oh, almost overwhelmed with the information that I'm being given. And who am I to have this information? And then quickly, this pressure of like, well, I'm supposed to create it. Because look, if I look outside of myself, look at all these other people doing great things in the world. What's my problem? I need to flip that.
Mm.
It's like flipping houses, like just
Mm.
live in it for a moment, right? Just live in it for a moment. And the other part of with that pulse of having creative fervor come in and shake you awake to your creatrix self. The world is telling me I have to flip it. So it never feels like enough. Does anybody know what it feels like to have these ideas and you write them down and you go, I don't know where they came from, or I had this dream and it felt so real.
Mm.
And if you're like Crystal and I, there's so many of those things that come in. I'm like, I just want to do it all. Life is so short. And so this is where I'll speak for myself. I've had so many seeds that have come and said, here's this thought, here's this idea, here's this creative impulse. And I might write them down. I have old journals like from
Mhm.
15, 20 years ago that I was going to do this and do that. And a lot of them have never come true.
Mhm.
And I think that if we're just looking outside of ourselves, that seems like a failure. That seems like I can't make something happen. But one of the things that I just recently did is I made a badass list. And I made this badass list as a reflection to just see, like, who am I in the world? Like, how do I perceive myself in the ways that I have created these sparks of seeds that have grown into lovely things that have impacted the world in some way, whether it's small or not. And who even decides that? I really resonate with that urgency to feel like I'm supposed to flip the creativity. But in reality, and I was sharing this with you, I don't know, it makes me laugh, but it really also gave me the chills. And that's like, if you think of sperm and an egg, it's not just one sperm that goes to that egg. It's literally hundreds of sperms that go to that egg, and only one has to break through that egg for creation to happen.
I like that. As you were telling that story before, I appreciated you were also saying at the same time that allowing the seeds to come. And so as you shared that story, that
Mhm.
visual of how many times, that is not a failure. Like, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that just because the one got through, it didn't make the other sperm seeds less
Yeah.
important. It was this natural flow, this equal opportunity of no harm, no foul. If it's meant to be, it's going to be, but not as if passively you don't have to do anything. They were actively swimming. They wanted to cross the finish line. It didn't have to be a winner loser situation.
I think it is the collective power of all those sperms, right? That allow for the conditioning and for the wall, for that receivership, right? That egg is representing the receivership of the creation, that
Mm,
spark of creation. We all know we get those moments where we're like, boom, and we get
yeah.
excited. And then there's the part of the humanness and all the stories. We're like, how am I going to make that happen? Or we try really hard and it feels like doors are closing. I've heard that a lot. It's like, I thought I got this spark. This is actually a big one. We can get sparks of creation, right? And we interpret it as a certain way. It's supposed to look a certain way. And then as we're trying to move this forward, it feels like doors are shutting. The universe is like, no, 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 no. And I consider those as little bumpers, you know? It's
Mhm.
like little, you got this, stay with the spark of creation. That doesn't mean that spark of creation was wrong. But again, like you said, none of those other sperm, they all had meaning and they all had purpose. And I think that collective sowing all these seeds, having these seeds planted, if that one comes up and it germinates and it starts to flower,
Mm.
that is creation. That is creativity in action. But the whole creativity or the whole creation is all of those things happening, right? All of those things need to be happening, that maybe only that one flower blossoms, but that one flower was not working alone.
It makes me think of the question of how do you nurture your creativity? And it makes me think of all the different podcasts that have already been done that I feel speak to this very thing of it is the everydayness. It is the being aware of you, your body senses, checking in with you, all
Yeah.
these things that are happening that allow all those seeds to flow and to be able to go far and wide, so to speak. So to be able to be sprinkled on the entire field. Like if your whole body was the fertile ground and you're allowing all these
Mm,
seeds to just
well said.
constantly be bathed on your temple. And it's okay that there's going to be a flower here and there's going to be a butterfly there and this thing's going to happen. It's all this is a beautiful part of the process, and it's important to be in the receivership of it. If our GPS light is not on, if we have shut it down or put up a wall or blocked that with our elbow, the
Yeah.
seeds are like, okay, well, I'll go over here. You know what I mean? Or whatever. It's not going to
Mhm.
fight you. And the question for ourselves, I'm sure, is how are we allowing our fertile soil to be nurtured in that creative, so that the creativeness of anything can be birthed? Are you open? Are you open? And what do you do to be open?
I love that, Crystal, the fertile soil being your body and how we can take our sensations. And I've said this so much with universal body language. What are those ways in which we can get even more intimate? The more sensations that we can smell, taste, touch, feel,
Yeah.
I think that the more our fertile soil interfaces with nature, So that one cool breeze that comes,
Mhm.
and if you're aware of your left cheek, it's actually through that little piece of breeze that comes by and kisses your cheek that becomes the seed that's given, the remembering of what you knew you were here for as a creatrix before you flew through that tree of forgetfulness, right? So if we are not aware, then we're missing it all over the place, and we start to, our fertile soil becomes less fertile because it's looking to germinate, it's looking to remember, it's looking
Right.
to create. And we all need to be creating. We need you, we need us to be in our creatrix
Yes.
selves, because to go back to my metaphor of the universe being the hive, we need everybody in that state for the hive, oh God, it's going to rhyme, for the hive to thrive. So, and, this is reminding me. So, you brought up something earlier. And I think that this is important because I've been on different parts of my life. I've felt different ways, I guess is the best way to say it, is sometimes holding too tightly to goals and being like, okay, I got to push, push, push. And you're pushing it uphill. And then sometimes you even accomplish it. And it's kind of like you said, you've sucked the passion right out of it. And that's not really satisfying, is it? I think that there is an aspect of that that's important. And then there's this other sort of perspective of saying, well, I need to just let the universe speak to me. I don't want to force a thing. I
Mhm.
just need to receive the messages from the wind, from that breeze, and it will just do it for me. I don't have to lift a finger. And this brings me to how I work with people in regard to both of those states. The state that has to show up and
Mhm.
do, and the part that needs to kick back and be open, and not just be open, but be aware and connected. We have to be connected to our fertile soil to be able to even receive what's happening, to be able to even recognize it. So we have to have awareness in that way, I believe, within our physiology. So when I work with people, we make contacts along the spine and develop these things that Donnie Epstein has coined as spinal gateways. And the power of developing and igniting these spinal gateways is that it's not just a location. So part of it is a location. If you imagine putting in your GPS point, you're going somewhere, boom, you put in the coordinates and you get to that location. So as long as you have your GPS point, you know where you're going and you land there. So part of the spinal gateway is that. There's a GPS point, there's a container, there's a physicality that develops, meaning it gets broader. But the container, without the creatrix, without the passion, without the energy or consciousness, right, is kind of what you were speaking to. It's like, oh, I got to flip it. I've got to do that. Sucks the life right out. Then it
Yeah.
just becomes something that is very structure, but with no life.
Yeah.
The other part that is part of this spinal gateway is energy. And energy, what I have found in my studies and working with people and working clinically, is that energy is what's holding the consciousness. Energy is holding those memories, right? It's holding those memories before I flew through that
Mhm.
forgetful tree, and it's there and it's always flowing around us, right? And sometimes it sparks and gets through like the sperm. I know there's so many jokes that could be made right now.
Bring
So I'm also helping people expand the energy that can actually interface with their body, with that fertile soil of their body. And that is also another part of the spinal gateway. Now, the energy, the consciousness, that memory
Mhm.
allows us to wake up to more of the truth of, like I said, of more, right? Of really the creatrix that we are. And so that's a really important one because we all certainly need that in this world where we're have all this inundation of information. So the power of working with people is expanding this energy, and you can see people move. If you've ever been to our website, wellspringdover.com, or our Instagram, you'll see spines move. And it's just like amazing. People go, wow, this is something that's really magical here. And that brings in the magic. The other part that, again, to go back to the first description, is the GPS point. Because without the GPS point, and we just have energy moving, we may get these sparks, we may have these ahas, and then we land in our life and our body and we don't remember it. We don't
Mm.
have a place to go back to go, what was that again? And we feel like sometimes hopeless, or things come and they go, they just move in and out, and it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't root.
Yeah.
And my whole point in sharing this is as a metaphor for what we're speaking to, is that the spinal gateway holds the GPS point, and it allows for that information, for that creatrix, for the consciousness of energy to find a place to land, to embody, to root,
Mm.
so that it can come back again and again and again. And what's beautiful is the more you expand the energy, the more that then expands the container, right? At the GPS point. And the more that you can develop the container, the more it allows for the consciousness and the energy to expand and evolve. So they need each other.
Yeah.
They absolutely need each other, hands down. And what we were speaking about earlier is that, where in your life can you, where you maybe have a strong grip on things, can you potentially just let these little sparks of MacGyver, of like, this is just so me, this is so me. And it can be easy to feel flat on that. That means that you've got too much of a container and not enough energy or consciousness, right? And then there's also that, like, you know what? Everything's love. I'm love. And it's all just going to come. Great. But here's the deal, we have a body and we need to walk. So when you get these moments in your love, well, how do you put that into action? How do you show up for love? How do you choose to commit and devote yourself, in this case of this example, to love? So we have to show up, we have to walk. And sometimes that breeze becomes a really strong wind, and it's like, oh, okay, you want me to walk this way. So we have to have enough flexibility in order to feel the breeze when it gets a little stronger, to say, move this way. You're walking, which is fantastic. You have a direction, great. But you need to let this stuff come in, because it's going to direct your sails. And even a little bit sometimes brings you in a whole different destination, which creates that germination and that flower to blossom.
Mm. Mic drop. Mic
I got a pen drop.
Pin drop. Chapstick drop. Oh, I have so many questions.
Oh, ask away, baby. Ask
So many
away.
questions. That was
Well,
beautifully said, for one. I followed that
oh,
perfectly, as if my spine was a garden and you were going, and where
mm,
you make sure you like dig like 2 inches deep for your little seed and the perfect amount of
mm,
compost, and the whole thing was happening. And it makes me think of the time where you were like, of course, if our spine was in the front and we could do
mm.
this, we would do it all day long, but we can't. We can't go here and do these things, as important as it is. So how can we nurture that in our body? How can we, and maybe it is embodiment practices, how can we land in our temple in a very precise way and connect that energy? I don't even know if it's possible. I don't even know if it's possible, but for someone like me, if I'm sitting here in Virginia and I'm sitting here going, I want that. How can
Mm.
I turn my GPS on? Where are my points? What can I do that would allow because I do feel like I gravitate towards that mental energy body. So I can be out here and like, boom, all this energy dispersed everywhere. And I'm like, how do I bring it in? And I know there's
Mm.
ways we can do it with breath and embodiment practices that you spoke to in the UBL. And it's like, and is that it? Is that what we do to, I guess, activate these places in our temple that allow that creativity? How do we, I don't know, I'm still
Root.
out here, right now, I'm just
Yeah.
out here. I'm like, boop, How do I come in here in a
Yeah.
way that is useful and that has the magic? Where's that wow factor of bringing it in here?
I'm hearing a lot of layers in that. So let me see how I can answer that question in the best way I know how. One of the things that I felt when you were speaking, and this is just one thread, I'm wondering what part of you don't trust enough. That part, the wow factor out here that you're saying, enough where you can just be with that
Mhm,
and knowing that that is enough right now and that there's not a race to have to try to figure out how to root it. So this is just one piece because I know I do that and we have similar qualities like that. It's like, oh my God, I get inspired and then I just want to be like, here it is. I want to give it to the world for whatever that means.
mhm,
And I don't think that's a right or wrong. I think that's a beautiful thing. But it's a real question. Is there a part that can sit in the wow of the
mhm,
out here that you're suggesting? Because there's this fear of when it comes in, something really sparks us. We're like, I don't want to lose that, I think is what I'm speaking to. I don't want to lose this excitement. I just had this spark that I followed all that, that felt amazing. I want more of it, is kind of what I'm hearing. So,
mhm,
how can I do that? I would say also that there are simple things that I do in my world is like, does it give me life? And you could even ask yourself for a week, ask yourself, because this can be an interesting thing sometimes when you ask yourself, what
mhm,
lights you up?
mhm.
And if I was to ask you right now, what lights you up in life, what would you tell me?
Hmm. I would say that it would be being able to bring in the excitement. What lights me up is being able to embody the excitement and
Mm,
not just let it live outside of me. But to let it be more than a fleeting idea or a quick experience or something that said, I love it, and then go right back to the disconnection, maybe, or the forgetful tree. It's almost like it's that image of constantly going, I remember, and then you get hit with the tree branch. And it's like this thing that's happening. I'm like, there's got to be a way and maybe it is as simple as coming back home, bringing it back in, bringing it back in, bringing it back in.
can I ask
That,
you a
that
question?
yes.
Can you give me an example of when you have had deep excitement embodied, whether it's with
Yeah,
as a
I can't
mom?
help but to think of my kids first, right? Immediately,
Yeah.
especially being able to witness them in a moment of just pure presence and
Mm,
wanting to join that moment without needing to get out of that moment to to change the station, being able to embody that moment for longer without getting hit with the forgetful branch. And I'm sure we all do this differently. I just know that I pattern this way super quick. Like I
sure. Yeah.
default to that. So I think my gravitation towards embodiment has been a guide, right? It's been this way of that's been my bumper. It's like you came here to do this because it's probably something that you don't do that well. And you've needed to nurture that with this experience. So for me, I can't help but to want to hold on
Mm.
to that embodiment piece. I want that piece to last longer or to be, and I know it seems like everything I say, I'm like, Crystal, you know the answer. It's simple,
No,
like
it
it's
just
coming
roll with
in, and I'm
it.
like,
Roll
but
with it.
I do the opposite
There's a
so much.
desire in there. You know, what I see when you're speaking is that you actually have this way where you're flying over your life and you're flying and you're like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing. And then you're like, I'm trying to break into my body so that I can stay there. Or that's what, at least what I'm seeing when you're speaking. And so I really hear that desire. And I think that we've spoken to this a little bit in different ways, but I think there's so many ways I could say this is like what lights you up and remember that you have these embodied moments. So even spending some time with that. Because I also know you as that version I just said, and I also know you as the hawk that's getting full on in a focus and ripping its prey apart if you need to. There's a strong organization and structure value you have that's
Mhm,
very potent. And as I listen, it makes interesting sense to me because you so desire to embody the creatrix and all this stuff that you see. And I think that for a lot of us, we can get the structures that you have may not sometimes let that in, right?
Mhm.
So that as you're trying to get structured and embodied, that sometimes the things that you are focusing on is actually the reins, could be the reins too tight, so that that part of you is like, well, you just let me in, I got some information for you,
Yeah.
and so I think it's one of the questions that's coming to answer your original question. I wonder if there's a new ritual or something that you've done that is the ritual, the structure is only devoted to the spark of your creation. It's only that. It has no other purpose. Sometimes you may come up like twiddling your thumbs, blah, 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 and it's okay. But do you have something? Do you have a drawing pad, let's say? And it's like, okay, 10 minutes a day, I'm just going to take my colored pens and I'm going to start moving shit. And I'm going to just or I'm going to remember a time where I felt that beautiful feeling of creatrix with my kids. And I felt that embody. And I'm just like, what is that? What does that move like? What is the color of that? Can you have just a ritual? Because the ritual is the structure. It's the container that I was mentioning ago, the GPS container. If you can have that homing beacon, but what happens is when we have a lot of containers in life, which are really important, right? They are our GPS points. But if we are just GPSing and structuring based on the culture or all the things that we're doing and producing,
Mhm.
there's this disconnect between the structure, GPS, it's not the right direction. So that creation is not finding itself. That energy is not finding the GPS point. It's a signal. The internet gets slow and it's like, I can't get that signal across. And there's a million things we can do, but from a place that almost makes you a little scared or feel like, oh, I can't do that. If there's a little judgment in there that it's not purposeful enough, it's probably the perfect thing to do.
Right, absolutely. As you were explaining the work that you do, my brain literally just kept going, it has to be this one way. Like I kept going,
Mm.
it has to be a very precise place along the spine, and that's the only gateway in, right? That's what I was doing. And then when I asked my question, I was like, oh, if that's the only gateway, and for me, I can't physically do that, what is another gateway? And then you were answering that when you were saying the ritual is the container. And I went,
Mm.
I kept going, the container can only be this physical spot that maybe you have access to and you develop and you have to do this thing. And I kept going, it seems impossible for me to do. So I kept going, well, what in the world
What do I
else
do?
is there? And then you were like, there's these other ways of expanding the container. And then it flipped it, right? It did, it
Mm.
flipped it for me because it's the very piece that I judge probably and need. I need to be in my container. I need to know and practice these rituals and not just continue to fly above going, I have 100 rituals. I know all these things to do, but it's like you actually have to do them. That's the embodiment that's coming into your container. And what makes it tempting to do that is for
Mm.
it to feel good. Let it
Yeah.
be something that if you don't know what your desires are, which is why desiring journal is so powerful for me and you, I know, and probably everyone is doing it. You've got to know your own gateways in. You have to
Mhm.
find these places that are in you because there's going to be mine are going to be way different than yours and
Mhm.
from everyone else in the world. So if we
Mhm.
can do that practice and questions and curiosities for ourselves, then we get to light up all of our gateways.
Beautiful. I think knowing what lights you up, and some of you might be like, I've no freaking clue. And that's just even more of a reason. Where you're just sharing that, I was thinking of a whistle. And
Mhm,
I could blow a whistle and it would be loud and everyone would be able to hear it. But a dog whistle is of
mhm,
a different frequency that only dogs can hear.
mhm,
And I think that's what I meant when I talked about a lot of times we have structures, GPS containers, but they're actually not the frequency of allowing our creative fervor to pierce. And so I think the question at this moment that I have is how can, even just so generalized, can we create a ritual that is 10 minutes or more that says there's nothing but whatever I want to practice in here is just something that represents creativity to me. It could be strumming a guitar. For me, it could be practicing Spanish. Like maybe I do it in the mirror and I do it, sillily or whatever it is. It's like that dog whistle. It just says, oh, this container is for my creativity. This is the purpose. It's not about a certain kind of creativity has to come in and now I have to produce it, right? There are times to produce in 3 dimension. There are times that we create a container to allow our creative remembering to flow in. And if you are one of those people that don't think you're a creative, I'm letting you know right now, it is a lie. You are part of the hive. You are part of this existence that only you, again, has that light of creation that we need for the whole, here it comes again, hive to thrive.
I love it.
Oh, so
I
round
know.
and rhyme.
Yeah, that was perfect. I do. I love the whole analogy of it too. And keeping
Yeah.
in mind that all of us bees are doing different things at different times. No one's like, all right, you don't see everyone all of a sudden doing the same task at the same time and contributing in the same way. It's meant to be different. There is some kind of navigational pull that only you know by tapping into you and your
Mhm.
truth and your access points and whatever we want to call it that says, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm here for.
And how can you take things that you already do that aren't considered by social standards to be creative? People have said that they love watching me work because there's this whole dance that happens. And sometimes I'm not kidding. When I'm working with somebody, I feel like Jimi Hendrix or something on the guitar because it's like this energy comes in and there's this frequency and you're just like graciously is the word I'm using, and humbly playing this incredible or being with this incredible instrument. And it wakes me up like to that. And I could say, hey, I'm a healthcare practitioner in an office. It's professional. It's not creative. So there's seeds of creativity, even in the places where you don't think they are. This
Yeah.
is my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just sending so much love and consideration of that. This sparks like, oh yeah, what if I remember that I am a creative badass? And being a creative badass is just taking your ownership of the creatrix of the special sauce that you are, like, period.
Mm,
Just like end it there. And those of you that don't feel it, I am going to say something that could be like fake it till you make it. Gandhi says, be the change you want to be. Like, just do the thing
that
that,
starts
or
here.
be the thing. Exactly.
Seriously.
Yeah. There's no performance that's necessary. There's
Mm,
only what draws you. Yeah. And that could be a relief sometimes.
absolutely.
So,
Mhm.
well, thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being in the Creatrix pool with us today. I had a lot of fun, and we hope you did as well. Always, we are grateful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now, Trevor Hall with Blue Sky Mind.
It's in and through the body, all along, in and through the body, all along. It's in and through the body.